Daniel, whoops, Daniel. We're going to go in that. Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're running a few minutes late. We're going to start, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this session this morning, which is going to be focusing very much on climate change and health. And it's a very broad field, climate change and health. But we're going to be focusing particularly on extreme heat. And then I'm going to make a few introductory remarks, because as you can see, the moderator who was on the program is not here. So I've been asked to step in as moderator, as well as being a panelist. So I just wanted to emphasize really that climate change and health has many ramifications. And although our focus today is on extreme heat, and it's very topical, of course, because much of Europe has been experiencing extraordinary levels of heat, and these have undoubtedly had effects on human health. Of course, health can be affected through many, many different pathways. It can affect climate change can affect the distribution of infectious diseases, vector-borne diseases, for example, waterborne diseases. The direct effects of heat, of course, increase death rates, particularly amongst the elderly. But it's not just the elderly, also other vulnerable groups, such as pregnant women. There's an increase in stillbirths, in premature labor, from exposure to extreme heat. And we also believe that it has important effects on very young children as well. Some of the work we've been doing in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has been showing that exposure to extreme heat in infancy actually affects child growth patterns in the early parts of their lives. So very wide range of physical and mental health effects. Mental health is important because heat has effects on mental health, increases suicide rates, but also mental health is affected by exposure to a range of different extreme events like floods, droughts and wildfires, and those mental health effects can last for long periods. We also know that climate change affects air quality. I've just come from northern Spain and actually been breathing in some of the smoke from the wildfires there, which are again unprecedented in many respects. And we're beginning to understand that wildfire smoke is probably more toxic than standard air pollution, because it's more oxidative and causes more health effects than the standard urban air pollution. So this is all part of the very wide range of effects of climate change and health. And two other areas that I think we need to bear in mind, of course, we're going to hear about them later: food supply and safety. So the food system is driving climate change to some extent, about 25–30% of emissions, major driver of biodiversity loss. But also the food system is responsible for a very large burden of public ill health as well. And it's been suggested perhaps 10 million deaths a year can be attributed to various nutritional factors, both undernutrition and also obesity and overweight. And then finally, of course, climate change affects the social underpinnings, the socioeconomic determinants of health and other factors. So, for example, climate change can increase poverty. When you heat up the atmosphere, it becomes more difficult to work outdoors. And subsistence farmers, those working in unair-conditioned environments, lose their labor productivity. They lose a significant percentage of labor productivity. And so their incomes are affected, and this can drive people back into poverty. So what can we actually do about it? And what is the evidence that climate change is actually affecting health? Well, we've known for many years, really since Hippocrates, that the environment affects human health. But very recently, the scientific methodology has improved so that we can now attribute health effects to human-induced climate change. So it's not just some general relationship between climate variability and health, it's actual human-induced climate change. And my colleagues recently at the London School suggested, for example, that the recent heat wave affecting just looking at data from 12 cities across Europe, they suggested that about 60% of those deaths were unlikely to have occurred in the absence of human-induced climate change. So that just gives you an idea of the attribution. And going forward, of course, the impacts could be very substantial. People sometimes say, well, will cold-related mortality actually offset, reduction in cold mortality offset the increase in heat mortality? And some climate skeptics are using that argument, but it's a false argument, I think, because heat-related deaths are likely to go up much more quickly than cold-related deaths are going to go down. And also, why would you heat up the whole planet in order to prevent cold-related deaths when you can prevent them from by better housing, better socioeconomic circumstances, and so on? And of course, you wouldn't affect the many other factors. So very quickly, drawing to a close, we have to adapt to climate change and we have to mitigate, and the two go hand in hand, as we've heard yesterday. And there are big health benefits from both of these actions. And when we look at heat specifically, there are a number of things that can be done. Obviously, the healthcare sector itself needs to get its own act together. Many of our hospitals and clinics are not well suited to climate change. Some of them are built in flood-prone areas. Many of them overheat in heat waves. And so hospitals can be quite a dangerous place to be, particularly if you're acutely ill. And so our healthcare sector is not well adapted to climate change, and it needs to become much better adapted. We also need integrated surveillance and early warning systems, using various technologies to give us better early warning systems. We heard something about that yesterday. But early warning systems, however good they are, won't prevent heat-related deaths unless they are linked to action. And that means you need to know where the vulnerable people live, so we need to reach out to those people working in the community, the family doctors, the community health workers, because they need to know, they know where the vulnerable people live, and they need to alert them. But the healthcare sector can't do everything itself. It has to work with other sectors. And we're going to hear later in this session about the importance of landscape, nature-based solutions, buildings, because we know that much of our housing stock is also unfit for purpose. And there's a news item on the BBC website yesterday saying that in the UK, there are people suffering from extreme exposure to temperatures in relatively new build houses and apartments up to over 40 degrees. And so that's a very temperate country, and yet they're suffering from heat-related effects. So you can't just put in air conditioning, because, first of all, some people can't afford it. Secondly, you increase the urban heat island. Thirdly, it consumes a lot of energy. So we need to think much more strategically, and we're going to hear from colleagues about that. So I think without further ado, I'm now going to pass on to our panel. Perhaps I'll just say one final thing in concluding, and that is that although we're focusing here on adaptation, let's not forget mitigation. Because if Ram was here, he'd be telling us that you have to mitigate, particularly what he calls, I think very appropriately, the short-lived climate pollutants, these major climate pollutants, which are really contributing substantially to climate change. But also, if we mitigate them, we get the near-term benefits, both to the climate, and of course there are benefits to air pollution, benefits to human health through better transport systems, diet, and so on. So I don't want to forget mitigation, although our focus is very much on adaptation. So let me move on to our panelists, and let me move on to the first panelist, if I can find my crib sheet. So I'm going to turn to you, first of all, Muha, and ask you, as a young physician and a member of the WHO panel, could you tell us a bit more about what you see as the role of the medical community, your own role as a young physician in leadership around climate change and health, with maybe a focus on heat? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haynes, and thank you to the Pontifical Academies of Sciences and Social Sciences, European partners, for inviting the WHO Youth Council partner organisations to participate in this session, as well as convening this timely summit. So I'm a medical junior doctor with the Junior Doctors Network of the World Medical Association, which represents 10 million doctors worldwide. So I hope to bring the perspective of a healthcare professional who's at the front lines of not only climate change, but also medical care. So I'm going to begin with sharing a story, because behind these figures, there are human faces. And it's a story of a little girl called Ella Kitty Deborah, born and raised in London. And she was born and raised in London near a motorway, and at the age of 7, diagnosed with asthma, had multiple asthma exacerbations, multiple hospitalizations, and sadly died in 2013, aged 9. An inquest into her death found that she lived in an area where there was unsafe levels of nitric oxide throughout her life, and found out that the hospital admissions correlated with when there were really unsafe levels of air quality in her area. And subsequently, she was the first person to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate. Ella's mother was at COP27 at the WHO Pavilion and shared this story with us with the health community. And it was quite shocking to hear that story, because it made me reflect what I do as a clinical practitioner. At the time, I had been practicing for about 2 years. And essentially, when we see patients, we don't really have a means of identifying who's at risk from climate threats and how to investigate and how to manage them risk as well. There's no particular guidelines, there's no climate-informed clinical training, despite us knowing what the health impacts of climate change are. So Ella's story is sadly not unique, and therefore we need to act. So air pollution is estimated to cause just under 500,000 deaths in Europe and every year, and worldwide 7 million deaths. Heat waves is becoming regular in Europe as well. In 2022, 60,000 people died during summer heat waves in Europe alone. The heat is causing beyond this. The heat wave is regularly surpassing beyond the physiological threshold for human survival, and this particularly affects those from vulnerable populations. So these are the elderly, infants, people who work outdoors in extreme heat, and those with comorbidities such as chronic kidney disease. We also see a rise in vector-borne diseases. We're seeing disruption in food and water systems, as well as deteriorating mental health, particularly in the young people. Despite this, health has often been seen as a peripheral consideration in the climate resilience planning. But we can't really have climate resilience without putting health at its core. So when it comes to the adaptation, then that must happen where the health happens. So in homes, in clinics, in hospitals, in the streets. And I briefly mentioned climate-informed training, climate-informed clinical training earlier, and that discussion is already starting within the medical community. So as the Junior Doctors Network within the WMA, we recently worked on a policy that was adopted that was about prevention of air pollution and protecting people from that as well. And it had a specific recommendation on intergovernmental levels, governmental levels, for national medical associations, and as well as individual physicians. So WHO also last year released a communication toolkit for healthcare professionals to help them communicate about the risk of the climate change, and also illustrate the co-benefits that come out of climate action. So as I mentioned, as clinicians, what we need is evidence-based guidelines in order to identify, treat, and prevent climate-related illness. In addition to this, we need other practical actions as well. So you briefly mentioned about the health system. Health system alone is a big polluter. It contributes to 4% of global emissions, and half of that is because of the supply chains. So we need sustainable procurement, we need to reduce clinical waste, and we also need climate resilience in infrastructure. So as you mentioned, both mitigation and adaptation have to come together. They sort of reinforce one another. We can't just focus on adaptation and ignore the problem that we have in front of us. So decarbonisation in the health sector won't only reduce emissions, but it will also save healthcare costs. Secondly, regarding heat waves, I think cities could develop heat and fund heat health action plans that include early warning systems that's co-designed with at-risk communities, protocols for protecting vulnerable populations, so this is regarding housing as well, and hydration, workplace protections for workers, especially those working in extreme temperatures, and integration of climate risk into emergency preparedness and triage systems. Finally, adaptation is not just technical, it's also transformational. So we need a shift in how we value health, how we value our nature, and also how we value one another. And that, I think, comes if we put health in the middle, intersectorally, not only in the health sector, but across the sectors as well. And I think that is what societal transformation would look like to me. Not just new policies, but new values, not just focusing on the systems, but also change in culture. And perhaps we could do that by framing the climate action positively, by focusing on the benefits that it will produce to the society and also to our health. And I think that is possible if we put health at the center of most policies, including our social and economic policy as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for getting us off to such a great start, and I think encapsulating many of the key issues that lie in front of us. Let me now move on to the next panelist, Beth Stinchcombe. She's from the International Federation of Medical Students Association. She's the representative to WHO. And for those of you who don't know, the IFMSA has been very active in climate change and health for many years, so it's really been a leadership organization in the field of climate change and health. And so, Beth, can I ask you about how you see the role of medical students, young people, contributing to building climate resilience, both within their own communities and across the health sector?
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion. It's a pleasure to be here today. So we all know that the climate crisis is a health crisis. And for medical students and healthcare professionals, it's already transforming not only how we care for patients, but also how our communities live, how hospitals operate, and how health systems prepare for future shocks. As mentioned, I'm a member of the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, which represents 1.5 million medical students worldwide, and I'm also a member of the WHO Youth Council. I'm part of the generation that will inherit not only the health impacts of the climate crisis, but also the responsibility to co-create solutions that were equitable, evidence-based, and sustainable. As we've heard, climate change is directly affecting our health, from heat waves that cause dehydration, kidney injuries, and heart failure, to wildfires that worsen respiratory conditions. Rising sea levels, flooding, and extreme storms are also placing emergency services under unprecedented pressure, highlighting vulnerabilities in our healthcare infrastructure. But what sometimes is less visible are the indirect effects, which are equally important. Droughts and changing growing seasons threaten nutrition, especially for children and mothers. Rising temperatures shift the spread of vector-borne diseases like dengue and malaria. Heat worsens air pollution, while water scarcity and flooding increase diarrheal disease risks. Climate-driven displacement also disrupts healthcare access and strains mental health. And beyond disasters, young people face eco-anxiety and anticipatory grief about the future. Taken together, these pathways make climate change a risk multiplier across populations, amplifying inequities and weakening the foundations of healthcare systems. Climate change is not only destabilizing ecosystems, but also reshaping our collective sense of security and social cohesion. Addressing climate change as a health issue, therefore, must extend beyond clinical guidelines and public health interventions. It demands societal transformation, designing urban environments that reduce heat exposure, creating energy systems that mitigate emissions while promoting equity, and developing health services that are resilient, low carbon, and adaptive to local vulnerabilities. So you may be asking, where do students and young people fit into this picture? Our contribution lies less in formal authority and more in perspective, innovation, and reach. We are uniquely positioned to connect clinical knowledge, community engagement, and policy advocacy into practical actions. I just wanted to highlight some IFMSA projects that show what this looks like in practice. In France, students wrote the Green Book, measuring the environmental footprint of universities and proposing eco-responsible solutions. The project transformed student insight into practical policy recommendations that influenced both academic institutions and government bodies. It also sparked inter-university dialogue on sustainability, showing how student initiatives can catalyze broader systemic changes. In Australia, the Climate Change and Health Network equips students with skills whilst also transforming hospitals. Through workshops and even a Greening Hospitals hackathon, students are registering hospitals under the Global Green and Healthy Hospitals Initiative, turning knowledge into system-wide sustainability. The initiative demonstrates that youth-led innovation can directly improve patient care environments whilst reducing institutional carbon footprints. Finally, in Quebec, the Planetary Health Committee embedded climate and health into medical school curricula and daily campus life. They created green coordinators in medical schools, implemented composting systems, and ensured sustainability as part of student governance. These are not symbolic actions. They demonstrate how medical students can shape curricula, influence institutions, and support climate resilience in health systems. Importantly, these projects show that young people are already leading transformative action, turning concern into measurable impact. We're now seeing the formalization of climate change and health on the global agenda, most notably with the introduction of health-themed days as part of the COP agendas and the climate and health resolution adopted by the World Health Assembly. This is encouraging progress, but several gaps remain. Clearer language is needed on cross-sector engagement, adopting a health in all policies approach that centers health in national adaptation plans, climate commissions, and nationally determined contributions. WHO tools should be used systemically to quantify the health co-benefits of climate action, and greater attention must be paid to monitoring and evaluation, ensuring that policies deliver tangible improvements in population health and resilience. Importantly, related policies must also include a just, equitable, and time-bound phase-out of fossil fuels with an ambitious and enforceable timeline grounded in the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, going further than the climate change and health resolution and past COP commitments. Equally, there must be a strong collaboration in policy design. Decision makers should work in partnership with civil society, grassroots organizations, and especially with youth and children. Inclusive climate health policies are essential if we are to address the full spectrum of impacts, and meaningful youth involvement ensures policies are forward-looking, responsive, and anchored in the lived realities of those most effective. The window for divisive action is closing. Young people already driving transformative change from local communities to national policy must be meaningfully involved if we are to secure a livable and healthy planet for all generations. The challenge is immense, but so is the opportunity to reimagine health systems that empower communities and create a future where both people and ecosystems can thrive. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for another great summary, I think, of both the role of young people, but also reminding us of how health needs to be integrated more into climate negotiations and climate discussions and more in the mainstream, if you like. Let me now turn to our next panelist, Lamia Massari-Becker, who's Professor of Energy Efficient Building Technology at the Karlsruhe Institute for Technology. And she's going to focus very much on the built environment, particularly urban planning. And the question, I guess, is what measures can be really focused on or mentioned in the context of urban planning and building design construction, for example, against extreme heat or flooding, and including the different levels of adaptation, infrastructure, urban planning, ad hoc measures, etc. So we're looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for my English. It's not that good. I grew up in Morocco, so I can speak German, Arabic, French. So I would like to speak now German, and I have the translator. Thank you very much. Ich würde gerne ein paar Punkte setzen, wenn es darum geht, uns anzupassen. Es geht bei der Klimaanpassung eben nicht darum, dass wir das Klima anpassen, sondern dass wir uns an die Gegebenheiten anpassen. Es geht nicht darum, dass wir eine unschöne Diskussion herbeiführen zwischen Klimaschutz und Klimaanpassung. Es ist für mich nicht ein Entweder-Oder, sondern ein Sowohl als auch. Und es gibt viele Beispiele, die zeigen uns, dass man sehr viele Dinge auch kombinieren kann und sowohl eben für Klimaschutz was tun kann, als auch für Klimaanpassung. Beides übrigens schützt Leben, Umwelt und Tiere. Nur ist es bei der Klimaanpassung jetzt und hier, ein paar Dinge können wir tun. Und bei Klimaschutz brauchen wir ebenfalls, sehr wichtig, viele Maßnahmen, die brauchen aber eine Wirkungszeit. Das ist der eine Punkt. Ich bedauere, dass die Politik Klimaanpassung, und zwar meine ich jetzt auch nicht die lokalen, kommunalen Politiker, sondern etwas höher, dass die Klimaanpassung nicht sehr ernsthaft betrieben wird. Die Kommunen bekommen von oben immer mehr Aufgaben zu tun, Luftreinhalte-Aktionspläne, Hitzepläne, Mobilitätskonzepte, Klimaschutzkonzepte, müssen auch viel in der Integration leisten. Aber das Thema ist Konnexizitätsprinzip. Wenn jemand was vorschreibt vom Bund oder vom Land, dann muss man wenigstens auch über die Finanzierung sprechen. Was können Städte an Unterstützung bekommen? Insofern sehe ich die Aufgabe der Zukunft ich zumindest als Ingenieurin möchte ich dazu beitragen, dass unsere Gebäude, dass unsere Städte angepasster werden, weil der Anteil des Klimawandels, der nicht mehr weggehen wird, der trifft auch noch am Boden, also on the ground, am Boden auf ganz, ganz ungünstige Verhältnisse. Nämlich, dass die Gebäude hitzefallen werden können, die haben nicht speicherfähige Materialien. Es trifft auf enorme Versiegelung, sodass aus jeder höheren Temperatur sofort eine Hitzewelle wird. Aus jedem Starkregen sofort Flut, weil wir einfach am Boden nicht gut vorbereitet sind. 3 Ebenen müssten wir adressieren, um hier besser zu werden. 3 Ebenen. Infrastruktur. Es geht darum, dass unsere Infrastruktur, egal ob das ein Krankenhaus, eine Schule oder eine Brücke, nicht zusammenbricht im Katastrophenfall. Wir müssen Menschen noch behandeln können in Krankenhäusern, auch wenn es sehr heiß ist und wenn es eine Flut gibt. Krankenhäuser müssten zum Beispiel eine eigene autarke Energieversorgung haben. Die müssen auch kühlen können. Eine Brücke darf heute keine Stütze in einem Fluss haben, mittendrin, der bei Flut außer Rand und Band fließt. Also es geht darum, dass wir dafür sorgen, dass die Infrastruktur standhält. Bis zu einem gewissen Punkt sprechen wir Ingenieurinnen und Ingenieure von sogenanntem katastrophensicheren Bauen. Bis zu einem gewissen Punkt. Man kann nicht alles lösen, aber es gibt ein paar Dinge, die wir tun können. Dann geht es ganz groß um Korrekturen im Städtebau und am Gebäude. Unsere Städte, unsere Dörfer, wenn ich Städte sage, will ich unbedingt nicht nur die Metropolen sehen, sondern natürlich auch den ländlichen Raum, den wir sehr oft vergessen in unseren gesellschaftlichen Debatten. Unsere Städte müssen hitze- und wasserresilient werden. Wie geht das? Das geht, indem wir eine Balance finden zwischen Grün, Blau und Grau. Also man kann sagen zwischen Grünflächen, Wasserflächen und bebauter Fläche, weil wir müssen natürlich auch Straßen, Gebäude und so weiter bauen. Aber wir brauchen eine Balance und diese Balance kann von Stadt zu Stadt völlig unterschiedlich sein, völlig anders aussehen. Es geht darum, dass unsere Städte lernen, beziehungsweise sogenannte Schwammstädte, Sponge Cities, Regenwasser beispielsweise dort aufnehmen, wo es anfällt und nur den Überschuss an die Kanalisation geben. Warum ist das wichtig? Übrigens auch für die Hitze, weil es führt dazu, dass unsere Oberflächen durch Gründächer, Grundfassaden, Pflastersteine, die Wasser durchsickern lassen, die speichern das Regenwasser und geben das nur etwas später ab. Das kühlt die Luft. Und übrigens, das führt dazu, dass ich auch weniger Kühlungsenergie nutze im Sommer. Also das ist auch wieder ein Bereich, wo Klimaanpassung und Klimaschutz wunderbar auch zusammengehen. Wenn wir früher gebaut haben, haben wir teilweise um einen Hof gebaut, Innenhofbebauung. Das führte dazu, dass Menschen in diesen Plätzen Schatten hatten, Bäume, Wasser als Planungselement. Es war auch ein Sozialraum und es hatte auch Schutz vor Lärm, zum Beispiel vor Autos draußen in der Straße. Heute bauen wir direkt am Straßenrand und dann ist man sofort allem ausgesetzt. Das muss korrigiert werden. Ich rede von Korrekturen, die Jahrzehnte dauern werden, aber es ist wichtig, sie hier zu platzieren, um sie weiterzutragen, jeder in seinem Bereich. Es geht darum, dass wir in der Landschaft auch Mulden vorsehen, die sich mit Wasser füllen, wenn es mal stark regnet, die aber auch wieder zurückgehen können, wenn es nicht regnet. Wir brauchen mehr Grün draußen. Wir müssen die Leute dazu animieren, mehr Grüngärten zu haben als Steingärten. Ich weiß, wovon ich spreche. Ich habe selber einen Garten und das macht sehr viel Arbeit. Aber es geht um bestimmte Maßnahmen, die man noch halbwegs realisieren kann. Es geht also um eine nachhaltige Bodenpolitik, die mit der Fläche, übrigens die Fläche, die einzig nicht vermehrbare Ressource, halbwegs vernünftig managt. Und ja, wir müssen manchmal auch über Entsiegelung und Renaturierung sprechen, sehr oft sogar. Das heißt nicht, dass ich die Fläche nicht wieder benutze, aber ich muss entsprechende Oberflächen vorsehen. Ich werde oft gefragt, was kann ich denn selber am Gebäude tun? Jede Menge. Es fängt ja damit an, wenn Sie planen, schon mal die Orientierung eines Gebäudes richtig zu wählen. Wie viele Fenster? Wo platziere ich sie? Welche Qualitäten? Welche Farben? Helle Farben reflektieren Licht, dunkle Farben heizen sich auf. Früher, das kennen Sie sicherlich auch, wenn man gebaut hat, dann ging das Dach nicht nur bis zur Außenwand. Es ging ein bisschen weiter. Es gab den sogenannten Dachüberstand. Das schützte vor Hitze, das schützte auch ein bisschen vor Starkregen. Das hielt also ein bisschen das Wasser weg vom Haus. Heute bauen wir nicht mehr so. Warum? Dann geht es um Materialien im Gebäude. Es gibt Materialien, die können mehr die Hitze speichern und erst später abgeben, idealerweise nachts. Dann kann ich lüften. Dann gibt es natürlich auch die Fälle, wo wir tropische Nächte machen, da gibt es andere Maßnahmen. Also im Innenausbau auch darauf achten, welche Materialien nutze ich. Natürlich hat Mauerwerk und Beton, Sie sehen es in diesem Gebäude, den besseren Hitzeschutz. Baue ich aber mit Holz, was ein wunderbares Baumaterial ist, kann es sein, dass ich vielleicht zusätzliche Maßnahmen vorsehe. Also Sie sehen, es gibt jede Menge zu tun in dem Bereich, man kann jede Menge korrigieren, aber es braucht Zeit, es braucht einen Prozess und ganz wichtig, es braucht auch die Unterstützung der Kommunen. Wir haben ja jetzt in Deutschland beispielsweise einen Infrastruktur-Sonderfonds und dieses Sonderfonds darf nicht auf dem Auge des Klimas blind sein. Wir müssen Dinge jetzt kombinieren, ja, weil es geht ja jetzt nicht um nur ersetzen, Brücke weg, neue Brücke hin, das Gleiche. Es geht darum, dass wir resilienter, dass wir besser, dass wir ressourceneffizienter werden. Dann geht es natürlich auch oft um sogenannte Ad-Hoc-Maßnahmen. Das, was ich jetzt erzählt habe, braucht natürlich eine Zeitachse. Bei den Ad-Hoc-Maßnahmen wird es darum gehen, dass wir auch sofort bei Hitzewellen was tun können. Trinkbrunnen, Sprühwasser, Sprühnebelanlagen. Das ist keine Baumaßnahme. Das muss schnell gehen. Das schaffen wir in Deutschland immer noch nicht, dass alle Städte sowas haben. Ich schließe damit ab. Vielleicht gibt es nachher noch Möglichkeit, weitere Fragen zu beantworten. Dankeschön.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and really giving us a tremendous overview of both the opportunities and the challenges in the built environment, which is so central, I think, to both climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And we need to build better links with the health community and the work that you're doing, I think. Let me pass on to the next panelist, Lenio Miravilli, who's the Global Chief Heat Officer of the United Nations Human Settlements Programme. And I think you have a very fascinating role, really, because you're kind of a pioneer as the heat officer. Could you say more about what you do exactly, why you're focusing on heat, and how your work relates to the MAST principles that we heard about yesterday?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here, and I'm very glad that I'm in this panel. And I'm very glad that Lamia spoke before me, because she has covered a really big part of what I'm trying to do, which is, I'll try to explain. So why heat? Because heat is the motherboard. So when we talk about heat, we can talk about heat on different levels. And a really important level is the global level, which is the reason why we're having all the mess that we're having. As you said, attribution science has shown that all these extreme weather events are linked to heating the planet. And if we see from the pre-industrial era, we see kind of how these lines of every year, kind of every decade being a little hotter, and then in 2023 and 2024, it jumps. And suddenly we start having temperatures that are above reach 1.5 degrees from the pre-industrial era, and exceed 1.5 degrees from like before we were around 1.2, 1.3, the average temperatures of the planet, and suddenly we have this leap, and lately, the last 3 months, it has gone down again below 1.5 degrees, but for 2 years, for over 24 months, we were above 1.5 degrees. And what does that mean? At one point, because people say, what is this? This doesn't make sense, and especially doesn't make sense to the people. Like 1.5 degrees doesn't mean anything. So one of the things that I try to do as the Chief Heat Officer is to explain and to try to make science understandable to the different audiences that I speak to. So, for example, 1.5 degrees right now means that 67 cities around the world today are dealing with temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius for more than 150 days per year. And these are temperatures that our bodies are not used to. They are starting to be really serious health problems at these temperatures. And I just want you to imagine what it means to have 150 days in the year dealing with these types of temperatures. Now, if we go to 3 degrees, which is where it seems that we're going, because we have managed to go much faster than we expected to 1.5 degrees global temperatures. We expect that the number of cities that deal with 150 days of more than 35 degrees are going to go up to 190. 190 cities around the world will be dealing with temperatures that are extremely dangerous for people's health. And this means billions of people, and we're not prepared for it. And the crazy thing, just to mention a specific thing, is that from the 190 cities, 100 of them are in India. So we have to also understand there's great inequity in what we're talking about. And on the ground, this means that people are really, especially vulnerable. Like heat has this unbelievable, so this heat, why heat? Heat has this unbelievable way, unlike other extreme weather events, of going through the city and finding where our most vulnerable people are and attacking them and impacting our most vulnerable populations. You mentioned it, Andrew, so I'm not going to go through it again. So the Chief Heat Officer is a position that was created to actually, because it started in cities. We started having Chief Heat Officers in cities. The first one was in Miami-Dade. The second one was in Athens. I was the second one. And then it went on and on. It was all women that had this title. Now we have men, because it's more and more people around cities that actually have this role, which is to coordinate, first of all, the different departments in the city, social services and health services, but together with the planning and the infrastructure people and the green department and because heat attacks systems. So the health system is like a really important one, but the health system, as mentioned before, has to be supported by all the other systems. Like we need electricity in our hospitals, we need water, we need transportation to bring the people. And all of these different systems have to be coordinated so that our health system can work. So a city deals with all of these systems because the city is really close to the people. The city people, the mayor, and the different departments are the closest kind of governance level to the people. So when we have a catastrophic phenomenon, when we are dealing with these types of, like a big heat wave, it comes very much to the city and to the different services that the city provides to make sure that things actually work, in coordination, of course, with the central government. So the Chief Heat Officer has to make sure that there is coordination and there is preparedness for all of these things. I usually think in three different buckets. So I kind of organize all of the different actions. So my role is to help now cities around the world to create policies and to create heat action plans. And usually these heat action plans, I think of them in three buckets. One I call awareness, the other one preparedness, and the third one redesign. In the awareness is all of the knowledge that can be produced to explain to different types of stakeholders why heat is such a terrible risk for our systems and for our lives and our livelihoods. And this means, as I said before, translating, a lot of it has to do translating science data so that they're meaningful to mayors, policymakers, decision makers. So, because often scientists create all this data, but they don't mean anything to the people that have to take the decisions. So this is part of like what the heat officer does, translate it, but also translate it to the communities that are in danger. So this is really another very important thing, and also figure out how to also build capacity with this knowledge among the different communities. For example, build capacity in the health community, the health worker community. Still, we have a lot of people working in clinics and in hospitals that do not have knowledge about how to recognize the systems of heat exhaustion and heat stress, and actually how to deal with them. So we have to build. I know that because I don't want to, I know it from Athens, and Athens is not like in Athens people, and we had to coordinate with the Red Cross again, like something that the chief heat officer can do is bring different stakeholders and coordinate universities with the city, with the Red Cross was an incredible strategic partner that we've done in many, many cities because people trust the Red Cross. And it's, Red Cross can knock on doors and make sure that people open their doors and trust them. So all of this has to do with awareness raising and translating and making early warning system meaningful for the people. The second one is preparedness, which is like during heat waves, what can cities do to prepare the most vulnerable, to protect the most vulnerable, and make sure that they have in place all of the things that you need to do for workers, to protect workers that are extremely vulnerable during heat waves, to protect older people, which are our main. In Europe, we have an aging population. I know, again, from different cities that it's almost 68% of the deaths that are linked to extreme heat are old people that live alone. And this is totally unacceptable. We can totally help these people by telling them by knocking on the doors and making sure that they know the risk and telling them what to do, like what the etc. So I'll close this. And then the final thing is redesign. And redesign has to do with all the things that Lamia said, and much more, and I won't go more into it, is bringing radically more nature into our cities and creating, like really, really thinking about shading, about wind, and about moisture in all different forms so that our cities are livable and beautiful. And the last thing that I'm going to say is that with MUST, it's really important to understand how heat brings together, as you said, Andrew, mitigation. We have to be very careful about air conditioning. The International Energy Agency is saying that today we have 1.6 billion air conditioning units sold around the world. By 2050, this number is going to go up to 5.6 billion units. 5.6 billion units means that just the demand for electricity for home air conditioning, not for air conditioning that we need, for example, for data centers, which is insane, and cooling and water and all that kind of stuff, because these are the two things that absorb more electricity than anything else, data centers and air conditioning. This is the projection. So 280% more demand of electricity is projected just for home air conditioning for 2050. We have to be very careful about creating sustainable cooling because we need air conditioning to save people, but we have to be very careful about how we use it. And in Europe, we have the capacity to do this kind of well and sustainably. So, and I had more to say, but maybe again later about how we can do things from the bottom up. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. So I'm now very pleased to hand over to our final panelist, Sascha Müller-Krenner, who's the CEO of Deutsche Umwelthilfe, if I've got it right. And I know that you've been particularly involved in climate litigation, but I think you're going to focus very much on nature-based solutions for the final presentation, if I understand that correctly. So over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And for those who don't know the organization, Deutsche Umwelthilfe is one of the leading environmental NGOs in Germany. And well, we think every day about how we can communicate climate change and to a broader audience, because here in this room, we have a crowd of people who are the true believers and who understand the problem and are already acting on the problem. But let's no mistake, you're not the average of the population. And in the public debate, the role of climate policy is declining. We have decreasing support. And so I'm thinking every day how we can change that and turn that around. And Well, I did what a lot of us should do. We should ask our children. So I asked my younger son. So my younger son he is running the social media channel of Die Zeit, which is a very prestigious German weekly. So he reaches with political messages 2 million people per week on TikTok and Instagram and so on and so forth. So I asked him, so why don't you do more on climate change? And he said, Papa, climate change is boring and it is not relevant. So we had a long conversation on that. He is now 27 and he obviously understands the issue and he is also doing a little bit about it. But then when we discussed that, he said exactly what you said. It's no one understands what 1.5 is. Climate change, it's an abstract concept. So I've been asking myself the question, our organization, we've asked ourselves the question, how do we show the problem? How can we show concrete solutions? And how can we make concrete recommendations to politicians? No abstract recommendation, not the IPCC report tells you, but something concrete. So how do we show the problem? We did something we called the Heat Atlas. We looked at all cities in Germany that have more than 50,000 inhabitants. Those are 190 cities. And we took geodata, we took population data, and we took data about, how much of the ground is being sealed. And then we put it together, and then we developed a ranking. Rankings are always wonderful, because media love rankings, and all the cities are very nervous to look where they find themselves. I talked to Henriette Reker, the mayor of Cologne, and we had this traffic light system, red, yellow, green. You're yellow, so you're not good, you're not bad, but there is room to improve. And this was fascinating because we had 190 cities and 190 local papers who all looked at where is our city and why is our city red in the ranking. And so there was a huge public debate. So I was invited to a lot of cities and to public conversation. And the surprising thing was my first invitation was to Ludwigshafen. Ludwigshafen is an industrial city at the Rhine. I know it very well because my father's family partly comes from there, and it's the last of the 190 cities. It's the worst city in the ranking, and I came there and I was sitting on the panel with the mayor, and I thought this will be horrible because he will shout at me and tell me why is our wonderful city at the end of the ranking. No. He considered it to be helpful. He said, thank you for showing us that we have a problem. It makes it easier for me to communicate in my city council and to others that we have to do something, that we need to invest. And at least we have to get better than Mannheim, which is on the other side of the river. So very interesting. So I can recommend that we will do this every year, and because this is a great way to initiate a public debate. Where do we find ourselves compared to others? And then you have a discussion about what does that concretely mean. Now, this is the one thing we've been doing. Then looking at concrete solution, again, we did something with cities. And this, again, it has this competitive element to it. So we have a project together with a number of German states, green schoolyards. So schools are great because every one of us has been to a school, many have children at schools, everyone has a relation to schools. Everyone cares about schools, the quality of schools. Well, people care about a lot of things in their surroundings people ignore. They couldn't care less, but they care about schools because their kids go to schools. They want to have a good school, they want to be proud of their school, and therefore schools are a great way to showcase what should be done. And we opened this competition. Schools could apply in different states. The format is a little bit different from state to state. And schools that want to turn their schoolyards from gray schoolyards to green schoolyards. And we said, we don't want an architecture bureau implement that. We want the people that are the school to design the change process themselves. So the children, the teachers, the janitor, the parents, and that has been fascinating. And some of the ideas, and particularly I went to a lot of primary schools. Well, we don't have a park with pink unicorns, so some of the ideas could not be implemented, but a lot of the ideas, in particular the children had, were good. And at the end, I've seen schools in different stages before the change, in the process of change, but then also after the change. And I have to tell you, over the last years, we've been doing that since almost a decade. Issues like heat and issues like heavy rain have become more important. In the beginning, it was a lot about, we want to have a school garden, we want to learn about biodiversity, about plants, about nature. But now heat stress is an important factor. I've talked to so many young people who have said, well, I don't go out in the break anymore, it's too hot. I'd rather stay in and do something on my smartphone. So if there were trees, I would go out, and it would be more comfortable, it would be less stressful. So this is wonderful, and those are very concrete examples, and every time I visit one of those schools, well, it always opens your heart, because you have all those people who are proud of what they have done, and I can just recommend to do that. We've now done that with around 200 schools in Germany. There are around 90,000 schools all over Germany. There are kindergartens, and those are places where communities meet. It's not all, it's not the whole space of the city, but it's a lighthouse where you can see the change that we should have everywhere in the city. And that brings me to my last point, and I can be brief because Professor Lamia Becker already basically mentioned it. So, in particular in the German case, but in a lot of other countries too, we have mobilized so much money to invest in infrastructure. We have to make sure that part of that infrastructure is green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, or at least multi-purpose infrastructure. Infrastructure is not only highways and trains and power lines. And the first is a mental step that people make that mental step, that infrastructure does not mean something that is made out of concrete and steel, but infrastructure is what ties people and communities together. And this, in my view, is the huge political challenge of the coming years. And as everyone who is involved in politics knows, politics is a lot of conversations, but at the end of the day, it's what's in the budget and very little else. We have to make sure that some of the money that is being spent is spent for climate resilient communities. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for very clearly and succinctly summarizing the issues, I think, in front of us. Particularly that last point about infrastructure, I think, is absolutely vital. Now, we do have a few minutes. I'm very keen to foster some kind of response from the audience, so please, you'll need to have a microphone. Do we have a roving mic? Yeah. For those online? No, because we have people online, so we need to use a mic. I'm going to take a couple of quick questions and then ask the panelists to respond.
For Eleni, thank you for information. And we are one world, so what is to do when the India disaster, I will call it, as this is so near and not far away that we can do things like Lamia say for planning. So what can we do to help India?
Great, thanks. Let me take one. I think John's hand was up, and we got another one there. So I'm going to take 3 quick questions, and then I'll ask the panelists to respond.
Yeah, hello, John Jelnuba. I'm a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Yeah, a statement. I really would like to congratulate the panel to link the built environment and the health issues. I think the built environment is the elephant in the climate room. It has been neglected for many, many years. Now finally the IPCC will do a special report on it. It's about time to do it. So congratulations for all your interventions here. I have a question. Actually, I will refer to that in my intervention in the afternoon, to the built environment, both mitigation and adaptation. The question is the following. All the things that have been proposed, like green kindergarten schools, wonderful, and of course, different urban plannings and so on. Now, when it comes to adaptation on climate change, we have fast variables and slow variables. You know, the slow variables is reshaping the built environment. And you have the same problem with ecosystem. We know now that ecosystems can only adapt by their own, by just moving away from the equator at 1/10 of the velocity which is needed in order to catch up with climate change. If we go to rebuild the built environment to adapt to 2 degrees warming or 2.5, that's what we have to face actually. How long will it take to do it? Beyond the nice things, planting trees and so on, having some shade. What is your calculation? How quickly, how long will it take? According to my calculation, it will take a century actually. Just a quick question.
Just a quick, well, that's a whole conference, isn't it, John? But yeah, we'll try to address it quickly. And the final question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is mostly directed towards Professor Massari Becker. So you talked about architecture as well as a way to cope with extreme heat and gave the example of the building we're currently in. I'm also thinking about traditional regional architecture like Mushahapi, etc., structures that have been used in different regions, but that are not being used anymore as much because of a Westernification of architecture. And what I'm curious about is, would it actually be useful or impactful to go back and tackle this Westernification of architecture? And if yes, how can we include that in the current policies and work that we're doing to go back from this colonialist style of architecture and maybe use the knowledge that we've been using for centuries in architecture? Thank you.
Thank you. So 3 great questions, very quick responses. I don't know who'd like to start, but
I would like to answer to the first and a little bit on the third, even though it wasn't addressed to me. I think that India is doing really good with, the central government has taken heat really seriously, and it's demanding that each city will have their heat action plans. It's already is planning for several hundred chief heat officers, and is actually collaborating with UNEP and UN Habitat to kind of have. Still, I think that international humanitarian aid and development funding that goes to countries, including India, is really important, and we are losing a big part of it because of what's happening in the US right now. So I think your question is very important, because I think Europe should not lose that, should not lose the desire to actually support other countries in the global south that actually do not have the capacity. But we should also create, when we do give funding through our banks or through we do for development or for different types of support for infrastructure is the right kind of infrastructure. And right now, this is not the case. We do see gray infrastructure everywhere in the world. Green and blue infrastructure is still shrinking, and this is something that we need to make sure that it goes. And one of the ways of doing it, which seems to be successful globally, is to create result-driven funding, so that you put the results into what you want to fund, which should have different criteria, including biodiversity, including water absorption, the sponge cities, including CO2, et cetera, like giving like performance specific criteria to the type of funding that we do. And this is up to, I think, all of us to make sure that the funding that goes out is the right, has these things. And to talk about the last one, this is also links to this, because part, and I'll finish with that, part of what we have to do is learn from the global south and be open to solutions that we don't go to it with this idea that we know everything, because we don't. We have to absorb knowledge that comes from the global south, especially dealing with extreme heat. But also we need technologies and innovation, because we can't go fast enough, which links to the last question. We can't just go back. We have to go back, learn, but also link it with new technologies, new material, new types of design to speed up the possibility of dealing with it.
Any other very quick responses? Lamia, do you want to?
Yes,
move on?
die Natur ist eine Ressource und ein Risiko zugleich. Und das müssen wir verinnerlichen, wenn wir jetzt auch die Frage beantworten wollen, was kann ich denn schnell machen? Schauen Sie, in Städten hat man teilweise Lüftungs- und Kühlungsschneisen zugebaut. Also das, was die Natur uns gratis gibt, die Stadt zu kühlen, die Stadt zu lüften, hat man teilweise zugebaut. Vielleicht ist der eine oder andere hier, der in seiner Stadt noch mal genau hinguckt, wo muss man zurückbauen. Ich kann ein Beispiel aus Siegen geben, da gab es die sogenannte Sieg, ein Fluss. Das hat man zubetoniert für einen Parkplatz. Das hat man jetzt wieder, Gott sei Dank, wieder aufgemacht. Also solche Beispiele. Dann hast du gefragt, was kann man dann schnell tun? Ich glaube, wenn dann die Katastrophe da ist, also wenn die Hitze da ist beispielsweise, dann muss es einer Stadt möglich sein, Trinkbrunnen schnell aufzustellen, weil das ist ja keine Baumaßnahme, die ich lange planen muss. Da ist die Wasserinfrastruktur schon da. Das heißt, das können die Stadtwerke machen, aufmachen, Anlage stellen, fertig ist. Weil Herr Schellnhuber zu Recht sagt, das dauert sehr lange. Was würden Sie schätzen, was es dauert, unsere Städte umzubauen? Ist eine sehr wichtige, aber auch ehrlich gesagt kaum beantwortbare Frage. Ich würde sagen, es gibt Bereiche, die wir relativ schnell innerhalb von 4 Jahren realisieren können. Eine Begrünungsinitiative. Und zwar nicht alleine durch die Kommune, sondern auch durch die Menschen. Ohne Grün ist kein Mensch glücklich. Ohne Grün ist kein Mensch glücklich. Also wenn wir die Leute dazu in die Lage versetzen, dass die selber in ihren Gärten, an ihren Fassaden, an ihren Dächern begrünen, dann kann das relativ schnell gehen. Und dann brauchen wir aber auch Unterstützung. Wir haben ja zumindest in Deutschland ein gewisses fatalistisches Verhältnis zum Thema Energie. Wir investieren enorm viel Geld und auch Aufwand, dass die Leute beispielsweise Anlagen einbauen, Photovoltaik und erneuerbare Energien. Das ist auch richtig und wichtig. Aber wir vergessen, dass auch Kühlungsmaßnahmen, ich komme gleich zum Thema Klimaanlage, wenn Photovoltaik im Sommer eingebaut wird, da habe ich hier auch noch nicht mal das Problem der Nachfrage und des Angebots. Das heißt, es fehlt Strom im Sommer, wenn es heiß ist, und ich kann es auch für eine minimalistische Anlage nutzen. Also auch das müssten wir eigentlich fördern. Warum fördern wir Wärmedämmung, aber kein Gründach? Warum? Was spricht dagegen? Und das wäre die Forderung, dann auch solche Maßnahmen unbürokratisch zu fördern, damit es auch wirklich in die Breite kommt. Und dann zu der Dame, die gefragt hat, ist es dann manchmal sinnvoll zurückzublicken? I would say yes, sometimes to be able to understand the future. We have to look back. Schauen Sie Andalusien. Wie wurde Andalusien gebaut? Speicherfähige Materialien, enge Gassen, Verschattung der Gebäude untereinander, Höfe mit Grün und Wasser. Ich würde sagen, auch wir müssen uns besinnen auf die natürliche Bauweise. Das bedeutet aber nicht, dass wir nicht technologisch diversifiziert und offen agieren können. Wir müssen nur verstehen, dass wir nicht gegen die Natur und gegen das Klima bauen dürfen, sondern nur mit der Natur, mit dem Klima bauen. Und da ist auch jede Technologie und jede Idee willkommen. Aber wir können nicht weiter so agieren wie heute, ganz klar. Dankeschön.
Thanks so much. Muha, final word to you.
Yes, just-
We have to close, unfortunately. But
That's fine. That's just a quick one. Just in response to what we can do to help India, I think it's important. I mean, I know we already recognise this, but it's the high-income countries that are the biggest polluters, and it's the low-income countries that suffer from it first. So that's number one. There needs to be an accountability for that. So the first thing that came to mind is regarding COP. When they do climate negotiations, they've got the loss and damage fund financing. Countries present what they need other countries to do and what they're asked for high-income countries. So I think that's been a challenge. So I think taking funding and taking responsibility and listening to the Global South and their ask in the COP and having that political commitment is quite important.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think the health effects of climate change will play a very important role in that, particularly the attribution agenda. Unfortunately, we have to close now, but please join me in thanking our brilliant panel. I think it's been a great session. Thanks so much.
Well, can I only echo that? I thought there was so much surface there from individual agency, which reminded me of a lot of the things that we did in the Bloomberg administration, where many of you remember we launched the White Roofs Initiative. So before we got to something clever and complicated like green roofs, we gave all of New York City's residents a bucket of paint and asked them to paint their roofs. Because sometimes it's simple, and sometimes you ask for individual action, and sometimes that is what changes things. And I think the connection of how we find agency in a wider system, we heard that very specifically. And I would say to Zascha, when we think about how we tell the story, the thing that stuck with me most from 3 days ago was a new study of how much heat-related climate change impacts aging, all of our individual aging. So just because we heard very dramatically that we live in many of the cities where heat will change the way that we function in it, we've already aged 9 days. If you are among the workers who are hyper exposed to the environment, you're aging year on year by 33 days. So even in the individual context, even if we don't feel it as dramatically as we heard, our bodies are feeling it. And to be fair, there's also a longitudinal study from last year that exposed that we are reducing the capacity of white brain matter development in our children because of heat. So if it hasn't come close enough to you, and all of you know this, but maybe those watching at home on our Zoom, and I want to say hello to them specifically, might be helped by some of those facts. Also, I'm a stone cold Eleni Miravilli fan because I write on urban innovation and urban transformation. So if you don't know all the amazing things that she did in Athens as the first of her kind, please read up on her work. So I'm Catherine Kluver-Ashbrook. In case you didn't meet me yesterday, I'm a senior advisor at the Bertelsmann Stiftung, who is supporting this very gathering today. I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Brigitte Mohn, the chairwoman of our executive board, Kirsten Witte, Nadine Pelkman. We work on integrated resilience issues in the foundation, but we are particularly pleased to hold this together in the European context because as every summit, and I was pleased to be at the one in my old home in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, has focused on the local challenges and local contextual circumstances. And we're going to launch right into a series of panels just like that to look at Europe's specific geological and landscape challenges in the climate piece right now and right here. I'm thrilled that we're also going to start with a multimedia event for this next panel. And Jacob Reiner is going to she's a human geographer. I'm already interested in that understanding and title. And Kyoan Rihai, the director of the program on energy, climate, and environment at the Institute for Applied Science in Austria, will be with us as well. So please join me in welcoming this panel up here, and then we get the particular treat of seeing a bit of Harry's film. Oh, so Jacob, you're jumping. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Magical changes are happening.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to this panel on the mountains. You will miss, those of you who know Andrea Fischer will miss her. She has unfortunately fallen sick, so she can't be with us. I'm sure you join me in conveying best wishes to her for a quick recovery. So I'm taking over. I'm the third last in the row, Jakob Riener. I'm very happy to have this panel. I think mountains is a very important part of the topography of Europe. And we have a movie here, so today it's a very special occasion. I will say some words to it. I will also, I think, we need to get the floor better into the discussion. So I will deviate a bit from the way we have normally gone through. After having the first intervention from the panel, I will shift right into the floor, so to have the opportunity to have questions from the floor. I will maybe deviate again from the concept depending on how this works time-wise, so because I would not like to eat into the recreation break. So I have to say that I was personally extremely happy that I was invited to this conference and this panel. Thanks very much to you, Joachim, and all the colleagues. There is a private reason why I've been very happy. I'm a kind of a mountain child. I spent my childhood and youth in the mountains. Later on, I had the opportunity to lead a division at the Institute for Snow and Avalanche Research, responsible for the avalanche forecast. But there is another reason why I think mountains is a very important topic. Mountains are a kind of a lab for scientists because they are small spaces. They are delimited mostly from at least two sides, giving a kind of well-defined area for research. And especially what you see is that the title theme of the conference, namely resilience, has a very special character. I felt this again and again. It has a very transformational character. So it's not about staying straight in a crisis. It's more about doing well by doing different. The reason for this is many strong processes are influencing the Alps of very different character. One is depopulation. So this is a social phenomenon. Depopulation, young people going away, not because they are afraid of living in the Alps, but because of positive reasons, professional perspectives. Fortunately, in many cases, there is a repopulation of people moving into the Alps. It's mostly older people, so the whole result of this interchange is less children, for example, in the Alps. There is policy reasons, at least in the country where I come from, in Switzerland, a very positive development, a development in agricultural policy, away from production-oriented, mostly milk production-oriented, to a protection-oriented, biodiversity protection-oriented direction. Very good. The third one is, of course, environmental and climate change. It's a change in the types and characteristics of hazards. My beloved avalanches are among the good things. This is maybe, I think most of us had a good message. Avalanche risks are likely not to increase, maybe if you are lucky even decrease. They will shift time-wise and space-wise a bit, but other hazards are clearly on the increase. There is also the need of a change overall from winter to summer tourism, and all these changes actually are interconnected, entangled, although they have different reasons. So when I talked to my brother once about who is continuing our small mountain farm, he told me, look, climate change is an important problem. He's very well aware of it because he has safety responsibilities in the community. But he said, this is for me, it's more or less plannable because I know about the time scales and so on. So it's important, it's concerning, but we know about what we have to do, for example, in terms of the transition from winter to summer tourism. What is much more concerning for me is the agricultural policies, because this is very unpredictable about how the detailed regulation will change from year to year. And I don't think he meant it really as a joke. So I think we need to take these different parts of the stories, different stories people have very seriously. And I hope a few ones of them we can go into a bit in the discussion. I would like to stop with my introductory remarks. Coming now to the movie, which we are looking very much forward to. Unfortunately, only 10 minutes out of a 1 hour movie. I think, Harry, you have the shortest affiliation here, filmmaker, nothing else. Maybe it's just all we can say. That I looked a bit into your biography, just to know to whom you're talking in here. Harry has started his filmmaking activities in the late 1990s, while still being a professional snowboarder. So you're probably the top sportsman inside in the room here. So we are looking very much forward to this movie. I have asked Harry whether he would like to make some introductory remarks. He said no. The film should speak for itself, and so I hope it is ready. Let's go into this. Maybe we should move a bit out of this place here so that we can look at it. We can see it here. Okay, good. Very good.
It is mid-July. Only in the catchment area of the glacier is the ice still protected by the snow from last winter. The glacier tongue is already bare. A summer day like this consumes 10 to 20 centimeters of ice. Early in the morning, I set out to visit one of the largest glaciers in Tyrol. At 9 a.m., it is already pleasantly warm at an altitude of 2,500 meters. And here I sit now, high above the Mittelberg Glacier. Like no other, it stands for conflict between nature conservation and tourism. Because alongside the ever-accelerating melting caught between two famous glacier ski areas, it is also threatened by a planned expansion for skiing. Despite an absolute glacier protection according to the Tyrolean Nature Conservation Act, this project has realistic chances of approval. How should we now, with the respect of the livelihoods of tourism, but also in terms of climate protection and biodiversity, respond to the upcoming changes due to glacial melt? Isn't it time to reconsider certain forms of use and development? But what happens when the last ice in the glacier ski areas disappears? How attractive will such former natural landscapes still be? Our glaciers are dying. They are disappearing silently. Shouldn't we respond to these changes and rethink our approach? I'm attending a glacier funeral. Here at the foot of Großglockner, this fact is being acknowledged. Due to the rapid melting, the Pasterze is losing the title of longest glacier in Austria.
Das stimmt uns traurig, weil das Abschmelzen dieses Gletschers gravierende Auswirkungen für alle haben wird. Wenn etwas Großes zu Ende geht, dann wirft das existenzielle Fragen auf.
Also die Gletscher sind in Agonie. Die sind nicht in der Lage, das heutige Klima zu überleben, vor allen Dingen in den Ostalpen, aber auch ein Großteil der Westalpen. Wir haben Modellrechnungen, die noch ein paar Prozent Gletscherfläche übrig lassen. Allerdings berechnen diese Gletschermodelle noch nicht dieses letzte selbstzerstörerische Verhalten von kleinen Gletschern, wenn Felsinseln herauskommen. Weil einfach die Felsen sich aufwärmen und dann langwellige Strahlung und Wärme abgeben, die vom Eis und vom Schnee zu 100% aufgenommen wird.
Woher nehmen Sie dann diese Ruhe, die Sie ausstrahlen?
Meine Aufgabe ist es nicht, irgendwo Emotionen zu erzeugen. Meine Aufgabe ist es auch nicht, Wege aufzuzeigen. Meine Aufgabe ist zu zeigen, was ist Sache.
This is one of the ablation poles. We use it to measure the lowering of the ice over time. So we drill a stake made of these lengths of wooden pole connected together, and we drill them 10 meters into the ice where they freeze in at the bottom, and we come back 1 year later and we measure how much more of the pole has emerged, so we can see how much has melted.
So now 1 year has passed. What did you see on this pole?
Yeah, here we have almost 4 meters of melt here at this site.
Wir machen Grundlagenforschung, das heißt, wir haben hier ganz neue Methoden entwickelt, überhaupt Permafrost sichtbar zu machen im Fels. Das hat vor uns so keiner gemacht. Also wir haben Tomographieverfahren entwickelt. Hier, das sind ja diese Schrauben, da haben wir 140 Schrauben davon. Und wir können hier über diese Elektrode bis zu 800 Volt auf die Schraube leiten. Und dann sehen wir, was dazwischen für ein elektrischer Widerstand ist. Und das können wir an 300 Meter Felslänge über diese Schrauben messen. Und das machen wir seit 2007. Und dann sehen wir wirklich in einem räumlichen Bild, kann man sehen, wo es gefroren und wo es nicht mehr gefroren. Und das ändert sich natürlich jedes Jahr. Und wenn das so weitergeht, wie wir das bisher sehen, 10, 15 Jahre noch in der Tomographie, dann ist der Permafrost hier oben weg.
Mit einer unglaublichen Ausmaß an Kubikmeter und eine Länge von 5,6 Kilometer, 400 Meter breit, eine ganze Schuttmasse, Schnee, Eis und Fels, was sich bewegt hat. Wenn man als Gesellschaft im alpinen Raum lebt, muss man zunehmend damit rechnen, dass Vorfälle auftreten, sei das Hochwasser, sei das Felsstürze, sind das Lawinen. In der freien Bergwelt, in den freien Alpen, in diesen riesigen Gebieten ist die Eigenverantwortung wirklich sehr, sehr hoch und zunehmend auch mehr von Bedeutung.
On the way back to Austria, I passed by the Rhone Glacier. I've heard a lot about the tourist ice cave there, so I'm making a stop. 20 years ago, the ice tongue reached all the way to where the lake ends today. Just a few steps from the car and you were inside 1,000-year-old glacier ice. The rapidly advancing melt of the glacier prompted the owner to cover the ice tongue extensively in order to preserve the ice caves. And this is what remains. However, the visual impairment is not the biggest problem in the use of this plastic fleece material. The abrasion and natural decomposition process of this material releases micro and macroplastic on a large scale. The fibers and particles follow the water cycle and penetrate into all habitats. In early summer 2024, I gain insights into a research project at the University of Innsbruck. This project focuses on the ecological improvement of the materials for covering glaciers and snow depots.
Wir haben dann auch im Eis uns die Faserdichte angeschaut und haben dann auf einen Quadratmeter Eis im Schnitt 3 Kilometer Faser gefunden. Es kann nicht mit dem Polypropylenmaterial so weitergehen.
Seit Anfang 80 gehen die Gletscher zurück. Dann entstehen die Sachen, wie man eben am Gletscher gehabt hat, mit den Steinen und alles, dass das Bild, wenn da oben Backer sind, nicht schön ist, das war uns klar, aber wir haben das sehr transparent gemacht vom ersten Tag. durch die Präparation, durch die Abdeckungen, durch Beschneiungen schützen wir zum Teil die Gletscher.
Ich habe so das Gefühl, dass eigentlich die großen Grenzlinien schon gezogen sind und wir halt jetzt noch einzelne Projekte haben, über die wir dann so heftig diskutieren, als würde es da sozusagen ums große Ganze gehen. Also das ist schon eine Dramatisierung, die einer sachlichen Diskussion meiner Meinung nach nicht zuträglich ist.
Der Grund, warum sie noch immer expandieren wollen, ist, dass laut Umfragen tatsächlich die Pistenkilometer der Hauptbuchungsgrund für Wintersportgäste sind. Und das finde ich kompletten Irrsinn. Die Alpen sind, soweit ich weiß, das am besten erschlossene Gebirge der Welt. Und wir brauchen einfach keine zusätzliche Infrastruktur mehr.
Das sind privat geführte Skigebiete, auch Gletscher. Die gehören jemandem privat, der dort investiert, der dort sein Risiko reinlegt. Und wenn der zu dem Entschluss kommt, ich kann mein wirtschaftliches Unternehmen absichern, indem ich eventuell noch eine neue Bahn brauche für die Zukunft, um dort auch die Arbeitsplätze zu sichern, dann sollte man das schon auch so sehen und auch die Freiraum lassen. Es sind ja keine staatlich geführten Betriebe.
Was, wenn kein Nationalpark hier entstanden wäre, wäre der Gletscher rund um den Großglockner zum Skigebiet geworden? Habt ihr euch die Frage gestellt?
Wir haben uns nicht nur die Frage gestellt, sondern diese Pläne hat es ja ganz konkret gegeben.
Was wäre das größte Argument, um einen Betreiber den zu überzeugen, dass er es nicht macht?
Wenn der Betreiber der Meinung ist, dass eine Naturlandschaft an und für sich und eine sorgsame Ressourcennutzung kein Wert ist, werde ich ihn auch nicht überzeugen können.
We are changing our living environment and thus the basis of life for us all.
Jede und jeder Einzelne kann durch sein Verhalten dazu beitragen, dass eine umfassende gesellschaftliche Dynamik entsteht, uns und unsere Erde zu retten, indem wir das Gemeinsame, das Gemeinwohl von Menschen, Tieren und Pflanzen vor Einzelinteressen stellen.
So a touching and moving arts approach to the glaciers or their vanishing. Thomas Stocker, you are a world-renowned climate scientist, having been a leading figure in IPCC reporting and so on. To me, you are best known, and I think to many others, you are best known for your modeling work based on ice cores from Greenland and the Antarctic. So after having this arts approach, can you give us a kind of short, unfortunately only 5 to 8, preferably closer to 5 minutes approach from the scientific side to what the picture is on the glaciers?
Well, thank you very much. And first, my acknowledgement to the Papal Academy. It's really a pleasure to be gathered in this room and to be able to talk not only about the global challenges, but also about the local impacts that we have seen in this movie. And I want to congratulate Harry to bring this local tragedy in the form of the glacier wasting and the differential adaptation, which is just a tiny bit of adaptation that is so evident that it's insufficient to the audience here. I think it's very impressive. We've seen that these glaciers retreat. I can recall a time in Switzerland where I was told, Professor Stocker, not much to be done about. Glaciers come and go, and it's just a natural cycle. I think we are much farther now, thanks also to the scientific community who worldwide got together and collected data about glaciers. That wasn't the case 20 years ago when we compiled our IPCC reports, but now we can quantify the effect of glacier wasting very precisely. And what happens in the Alps, what happens in all the high altitude mountains around the world with the glaciers disappearing has indeed a global effect. Glacier water that now flows into the ocean is the second most important contributor to sea level rise. So every drop that we lose from these alpine glaciers contributes to global sea level rise. Now, glaciers, it was shown very briefly in this movie, also have an important economic value for the alpine regions. In Switzerland, it's part of the tourist infrastructure, if you so wish. It's the face of the Alps that attracts people to come and recreate, and that face will change in a rapid way. We also see very dramatically that these measures that people take, either by covering glaciers with fleece, which is another environmental challenge, or by building more infrastructure that simply delays the challenge to the next decade, when that infrastructure would also be challenged by permafrost melting, are just insufficient measures and acknowledgements of a global problem that manifests itself here with this rapid retreat of the glaciers. What I'm much more concerned about is the impact that glacier melting has for downstream settlements in two ways. One is the increased instability of the terrain. We're essentially confronted with a rapid, fast-track geological processes where mountains become unstable, settlements are threatened, all the maps that are being drawn on sort of statistical understanding of dangerous zones have to be redrawn. Where people have settled over centuries is no longer safe. There are some tragic examples just this year in Switzerland and around the world. But the second impact is the way the water management downstream from glaciers will change. And that's really a challenge that has repercussions that we don't understand fully to this moment. Just imagine a glacier is a sponge. We have heard about the sponge cities, an invention how to restore water. That's nothing else than what a glacier has been doing for centuries in the Alps. We're losing the sponges, the natural sponges that essentially cut the peaks of precipitation, which means that water is delivered downstream in a more regular way over the seasons than if the glacier is no longer there. And that has an impact on the water quality, on the groundwater replenishment, but most importantly, on the management of power plants, both hydropower plants and nuclear power plants that have to be cooled. In Switzerland already now, with the change of the hydrological cycle through the season, we have to reduce the power that we can draw from nuclear power plant because the cooling is no longer sufficient with the reduced amount of water. The heating of the river downstream of a nuclear power plant would be too high and would destroy the ecosystem in the river. So think about that melting somewhere high up in the mountains over 3,000 meters altitude has an impact on the fish stock somewhere in a river downstream. So it's these challenges. I think glaciers and their fate should really motivate people, should motivate governments to actually ask about the fundamental measures that are necessary, and that's the M in the MAST. Adaptation will happen, must happen. You've seen some insufficient examples in this movie by covering the glaciers, but mitigation, that's the key to actually preserve what will be left when we look at the scenario calculations of the few icy areas above 3,000 meters above sea level in the near future.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Thomas, for this very quick and concise overview, and also for pointing out these cascading effects, which I'm not sure if when the atomic power plants were planned, anybody had in mind that this might be a thing to think about at this time. As promised, I would like to give the floor the opportunity to maybe if there is a question on glaciers around immediately or a comment either to the movie or to our comments, you're most welcome. Is there a microphone here? Just in the front row.
Thank you. We very often had the question here, we know, many people in the science area know what's happening, right? So how can we use film and media or art to translate the danger we're having ahead? And I think that translation will be more and more important in the future, not to only create awareness, but to create change. So how can the science and art community work closer together? That's something I think that would be super helpful to understand how we can promote this change, given basically the different tools art and science can then create for the population.
Thank you. Harry, maybe can you give us an impression on how you can interact with very different publics, I think.
What I did with this film, it's not a long time ago, I found out that I actually do journalism, climate journalism, that is very important. Try to translate what science finds out, what science says, to the people out there and transport it with emotions to get people feel what it is all about. And it is very difficult to break it down to those specific facts and feelings, but without losing the real point and the truth of the fact. And this was the biggest challenge with this project. And I really put my heart in this film for the last 2 years, and I'm very, very glad to be now where I am here, sitting on this panel with so many scientists. This is really incredible.
Joachim.
Thomas, how does glacier melt figure in European climate policies at the EU level? The Alpine mountains are Swiss, Austrian, Italian, German, etc.
Well, we have an Alpine Convention, which was a great thing a couple of years ago, where the goal was to reduce the traffic across the Alps and therefore the emissions, part of the emissions of fossil fuels. The fact is that this Alpine Convention is something on paper, and the different countries know about this convention, but the implementation of it, given the ever-growing traffic and the pressure and the financial context of rail versus road, has come to the effect that this Alpine Convention at the moment is no longer in effect. So it's a construction site. We're not countries, at least I can talk for Switzerland, we are not a country, an exemplary country of mitigation. Our emissions, domestic emissions, have gone down, but that's not the relevant thing. It's our consumption in Switzerland as a highly industrialized and rich nation where you have to consider the entire emission along the chain, that is the gray emissions, which are twice that of the domestic emissions which are relevant for the Paris Agreement. So that's where we have to start working for the M. The A will happen necessarily.
Thank you, Thomas. Now, I would like to go on in the row of esteemed panelists to Keivan Riahi. Keivan, similarly to Thomas, you have been extremely important in the IPCC process, and for many other reasons also. From my point of view, I have very much enjoyed your work on the shared socioeconomic pathways. It has been very helpful. But you have also been a co-author of the recently published Austrian climate assessment report, the AAR2, if I remember its name correctly. Can you give us an impression on some of the results, maybe outside glaciers, but you can also refer to glaciers, of course, especially with respect to mountains, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, first of all, of having me here. It's really a big pleasure to be on this panel. And thanks also to refer to that you referred to the Austrian assessment report. So it was completed just recently, last month, and launched. It was actually a small IPCC effort on the Austrian scale, trying to take what we have seen in the global assessment and try to translate for Austria. So what sort of impacts have we observed in the past, and what sort of impacts can we see into the future? What are the mitigation options in Austria? What do they cost? Which sort of transition pathways are possible? And with Austria being a mountain country, or at least large parts of Austria, the mountains have played a big role. So the assessment finds that, similar to what you said, Thomas, and fantastic, Harry. So I think your pictures are actually sometimes communicate much better than the raw numbers. But the raw numbers basically tell us that we have lost 40% of the glacier area in Austria already. And that is with virtual certainty we will lose the other 60% over the course of this century, even if we are very successful in mitigation. So this is not only a threatened, unique ecosystem, I would say extremely important in Austria also, if you think about identity and cultural identity of the country, that we might lose, almost certainly will lose in the long term over the course of this century. And it will have implications for the hydrology, as we have heard. At the same time, I think we have to think also about how can we mitigate in alpine countries or in mountain countries like in Austria. In principle, the Alps are a place where you have extremely high mitigation potential. So at the one hand, if you think about Austria, more than 90% of the electricity is generated by hydro, and this is just possible because of the topography that we have. Hydro is extremely important in terms of also balancing and helping the load fluctuation of new renewables. So if you bring solar and PV on the market, pumped hydro can help you to balance this out, and also we can store seasonally water up there. At the same time, if you look into mitigation, actually same observation here. Austria has been in the recent years successful in reducing emissions, but a lot of that has not been happening actually in the mountains. And there are important trade-offs if you think about the expansion of new renewables, particularly in the Alps. So you have trade-offs in terms of biodiversity implications, particularly on the southern. If you think in the southern slopes of the Alps, where you have a very high biodiversity, these are not the best places. These are the best places from the solar potential perspective, but these are not the best places to put actually the solar panels at the end. Wind is perceived as a major interference with landscape, and thus Austria, which heavily relies on tourism, there is an additional trade-off here, and that's why actually it has taken very long time to have the first wind farms in Western Austria. So it's just 2 years ago that we had the first wind installation actually in Western Austria. While in Eastern Austria we had huge wind farms, which were expanding quite rapidly. I think to perhaps explain the problem a little bit further, this has led to quite some polarization also in the society. So most of the wind projects take 6 to 7 years until actually they can be realized, and that has led to wind companies becoming bankrupt in Europe, despite that they have actually quite economic potential, and they will be very important for mitigation, because you need not only solar, you need solar and wind in combination so that you can manage that load. Wind is also blowing in the night, and obviously we don't have sun in the night, and you need to balance things in the system. And that's why the European Union went ahead and had a new directive, which they call the REN III directive, which helps you to accelerate basically to build renewable energy. I personally think we need to have a discourse locally, nationally, but also subnationally. If we want to make this successful in the Alps as well, there is no way around a very dedicated effort of zoning. Yeah, so we need to identify zones and areas where we want to prioritize biodiversity, yeah, or where we want to prioritize other activities than renewable expansion. But in the contrast, there should be areas and zones where we can expand renewables, and we don't delay the expansion of it, because otherwise we will not achieve net zero emissions. Yes, and I think that's extremely important to really tap the potential in the Alps. We often forget also many of the major benefits of this transition beyond the climate benefits. The trade-offs are very visible, but the benefits of basically switching to a local energy system where the whole value chain is within the country, where you've reduced the vulnerability against price fluctuation, supply disruptions of fossil fuels, which have hit us enormously in Austria and has destroyed a lot of welfare in the recent years. That would not have been so severe if we had switched to this new system much earlier. So the Alps are a place of great potential to achieve this transition. Yeah, there are many other things that I could mention here as well, but let me perhaps also add that it is enormous importance to, if you want to increase the acceptability, zoning is one way of doing it. The other way is to have clear legislation which where local communities can benefit from the installations that are happening in their backyards. That's often not happening, and I'm personally at the moment, and what perhaps to conclude with that, a little bit worried about the recent trends that I see in Europe. I speak here as also a member of the advisory board at the European Union, but also seeing what is happening at the moment in Austria. I think we need to be very careful that the costs of the infrastructure that we need as well. So if we need to build electricity connections, transmission, but also distribution. We need storage facilities, that these are now added to the new technologies that we want to bring into the markets so that we can meet our climate targets, while at the same time we safeguard the incumbent industries and the fossil fuel providers, which make enormous profits. So we have a very bizarre discussion at the moment, how solar PV and wind providers in the future should have a much higher share, for example, of the electricity grid in Austria. We're completely neglecting that at the same time we have billions of profits in the fossil fuel industry, and if you calculate those profits up, you could actually easily finance the whole transition. So you need a more equitable, I think, distribution of costs, and also a more holistic accounting of the benefits of these new technologies if we want to make them successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Keivan to show us that it was obviously extremely worth having this report and this assessment. Especially, I think it's very interesting development going on now. If we are have to take a side between profit-oriented and protection-oriented processes, then it's kind of easy for us. I think we will be all on the same side. But when two protection-oriented processes clash, like green energy and landscape protection, then it gets really interesting. And I think science should say a lot in advising us on what processes and what ways of structuring these discussions we can have. And I think you did a first step with the idea of zoning, actually, where it really needs to be discussed. So thank you very much again. Now I will deviate again a bit from what we did in the earlier session, because the next question would be one which I have just discussed before the panel with one of our young colleagues, namely when we are talking about the mountains, many of us explicitly or implicitly mean the Alps, so just our surrounding, northern Italy, Austria, Switzerland and Western France. But the Alps is more than that, actually. And I had just discussed with Kadri, a young colleague from the Balkan, to actually bring in some concerns you have in this. Maybe some of them are similar to what we have around here, but others may be very different. So I would very much like to give you the floor to maybe not just ask questions, but to share some further insights with us. But you can also ask questions, of course, to the colleagues. You need a microphone, I think. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So I'm coming from Bulgaria, in the heart of Balkans, and for us, mountains are treasures. And I want to bring some other important points regarding mountains, because they are, as we saw with the glaciers, they are our source of water. And what we face first, I would like to say about water resources, that people in rural areas, they feel the need. They feel actually with the water rationing and the higher taxes on water, that they can't even take care of their gardens and crops, and agriculture is suffering because of that. I will share my personal also experience in the beginning of June in the mountains when I was climbing the highest peak in Balkan Mountain, and where is actually located also the highest waterfall in the Balkan Peninsula, which is supposed to be in its maximum power in the beginning of June. The picture was really sad because it was only a tiny stream trickling down the rocks. And also, maybe some of you heard about the 7 Rila lakes, which are our wonder in Bulgaria. They are alpine lakes with a crystal clean water. But actually, what we observe is that they are turning into wetlands because of the landslides and the rock falls and the sedimentation. This is actually a sad picture how we lose our treasure. And the second point I want to pay attention on is our forests. Forests are under pressure because of 2 directions. One are the deforestation. Second is the summer wildfires. Uncontrolled cutting of the forest is also a very important point, for what I'm fighting for since high school. Unfortunately, it's still a fact. And losing our forests is also cause instability of the soil, and this leads to hazards, of course. Hazards with landslides, rock falls during the wet season when there is no forest to keep the soil stable. Our routes become dangerous, not only for locals, but also for tourists. And avalanches, we also have risk of avalanches in our mountains, alpine mountains like Rila and Pirin, which are the highest ones. In the ski regions last year, unexpected avalanches causes loss of lives because the temperatures in winter are not any more stable. And if one day we have snow, heavy snow, normal winter conditions in the mountains, the next days we can have like very high temperatures, not typical for winter. And this also is very dangerous. So my question is not whether this climate change is happening or not. We see them, we feel them, even if the government doesn't pay that much attention, the population is feeling it. And my question is how fast, how quickly we should act to stop this and to save our water, our forest, our community, because this is not only loss of nature, but we also lose our identity, our cultural identity, and this is more than environmental crisis. It turns into when the survival and the identity is threatened, we lose also, this turns also in cultural crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kadri, for this very important intervention. I think if there is a summary of the session, it's very important to note that when we talk about the mountains, it's really not just about the core of the Alps. I'm not sure whether your question on how quick we need to react was rhetoric or not, whether you expected an answer in terms of numbers. I think we can't act quickly enough when we are thinking about the lower mountains. For example, we have in Switzerland, and I'm sure also in Austria, there have been ski resorts that have even already dismantled their installation. It's not only hasn't only gotten into difficulties, but it's not even there anymore. So in a way, we should, for many of these regions, we would have needed to act yesterday, I think. But thank you very much again. I would now finally, after a long time, come to Sophia. The reason Sophia comes last is that she is actually addressing the most important in the Alps, namely human beings. We're just talking about physical object, about physical processes, but after all, humans living there are most important. And we did not so much talk about the environmental hazards so far. We mentioned it from time to time. But Sophia, you are not, I'm kind of maybe abusing you in the sense of not like most of the other young colleagues being asked about concerns of the youth. You may also respond or address this, but you are, I would like to use you as an expert actually, because you have done research on how people in small mountain villages are dealing with strong impacts from natural hazards, and you might tell us a bit about this very important aspect.
So hello, and thank you for actually who invited us and letting us, the youth, infiltrate basically all panels, because as mentioned, we are not only youth, we are also experts in our domains. I happen to be a human geographer, so I know a lot about the environment and how people interact with nature and how that can be seen on a smaller or larger levels, but also my colleagues here. For example, Kadri, she's a medical, in the medical field, and she's also very much an expert in her region and also in her training in her field. So it's very important that the perception of youth changes, and that we're not only seen as kids, as young people, unreliable, but actually as experts in our own rights. We know our regions, we know what we talk about, and we also know what it is to be young and sometimes unheard or not listened to or not taken seriously. For example, getting back to the mountains, I've lived all my life near mountains in different areas in the United States, near the Appalachian Mountains or the Rocky Mountains, or in Switzerland. I see the Mont Blanc, which is a literal translation means white mount or white mountain. I see it from my house, and I hear from my parents and my neighbors, elderly neighbors, and also just from my panelists here, that everything is changing in front of their eyes, that they see that change is happening. Even in the video, we see that change is happening, and I can also see it. I'm young, I'm in my 20s, and I can see change. It's scary. I remember when I was younger, I saw the Mont Blanc, it was white all year round. And now, a few years ago, I realized that in summer, it's not white anymore. It's starting to become this dark blue from where I live. And it's something that is kind of terrifying when you think about it, that a white mountain is no longer white. And we all know that climate change affects everybody, and especially mountainous regions are very vulnerable to these changes because of all the extreme events that we suffer. But also, it is not only the people who live in the mountains, live up in the mountains, in the small villages, that suffer the consequences of these changes. People downstream, or even where I live in the countryside, far away, near the Jura Mountains, not in the Alps. We suffer from problems of electricity, transportation, communication, agriculture, just in general. Every day when I open the news, there's some event happening in the Alps, and I get alerts from my phone, weather alerts or just risk alerts of rock slides, mudslides, high rainfall, flooding, and it's kind of scary. And as Jakob mentioned, I have studied small regions in the Alps. I've done case studies on different areas, a village in Gutanen in the Bernese Alps, but I wanted to just talk about an example in the canton of Graubünden in the eastern part of Switzerland. It's a very small village. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this little village called Brienz. It was all over the news about a year and a half ago, and it was also live streamed. And you probably don't know why it was live streamed, but there was expected rockfall and landslide that was going to erase a whole little town in the Alps. And they had made it into a live stream so people could follow little rocks falling down the mountain. I was at university at that time, and my professor, he's a very big nerd in geostrata, so we had it as a background to just be sure that everybody could see when this predicted landslide would happen. And when you think about it, I was in class, I was like, haha, this is funny. Like, we're waiting for a rockfall. But when you think about it, it's terrifying that something like this is happening and we can see it live and nothing is really being done about it. So I was then thinking, how can we continue to live in a world where at any second, especially in the Alps, our whole life is can be wiped away? Not just, the mountains are crumbling, permafrost is thawing, and all these avalanches, but actually our whole livelihoods and our whole life disappears. Because we live there, that's our life, that's our community, that's our society, those are our connections, that is where we grew up, we have emotional attachments, and everything just can disappear in a second. And as a human geographer, I'm not sure if everybody knows what that means, but it's basically sociology mixed with the environment to see how people interact with and their environment and see how this is an important part of climate change, especially, or climate sciences. We talked about mitigation, which is kind of the reduction or the prevention of emissions. But then there comes the question of adaptation when mitigation is not enough. So it's to reduce the impact of climate change. And as a human geographer, as a person who is very much looks at the behavior of humans, we have to talk about transformational adaptation. It goes in the direction of a societal transformation, but it is the change of our fundamental attributes, the fundamental attributes of a system in response to climate and its effects. So we actually have to change rearrange our old dominant structures. We have to change the way we think, we have to change the way we act, we have to change the way we consume different products, and it's not at all easy. It's scary because there's the dominant structures that are put in place. Fossil fuel industries are very much still dominant in politics and policies, and for this we have to have change, and for this we have to rethink our society. And this is just my personal experience and my personal perspective, is that it has to go through a joint knowledge production, an interdisciplinary approach to society that builds a more holistic understanding of what the environment is, what society is, and what we need, and not only just look at the data saying that this is happening, permafrost is thawing, there's a rock slides, avalanches, but also understand what people want, what people need, how we can save different communities, because sometimes it's easier to just have a little town. Oh, okay, we'll just move you out of harm's way because, well, you are living you're exposed to natural hazards. But maybe some people are deeply attached to these. Indigenous communities are attached to their land. It is not a question of if they are under attack, if not per se, but exposed. But people are very much attached to these areas because this is where they are from. This is what makes them, this is their identity. We talked about loss of identity, as Kadri mentioned before. It is a big question that also needs to be taken into consideration and not just look at, oh, there's avalanches, there is rock slides, we have to move you to save you. But actually, we have to understand what people need to be saved. And coming back to this youth perspective, we are now creating a new normal. We are now having to recreate our whole society through this transformational adaptation. It is also important that in this new normal, we have new actors that take precedence. Young leaders, people, yesterday was mentioned that the missing people who are not always part of the debate have to be central in the discussions, indigenous people, people with vulnerabilities, people, disabled people. Youth, but people also have to understand that we know what we're talking about, we know what we're doing, and we have to be trusted to know, and you have to trust us to know what we want. You have to trust us that we know what we can do, and you have to trust us that we know how we can do it, and we can do it now. And you have to trust us also to help you and us co-create a new normal, as talked about intergenerational creation, and you have to trust us that we know that we are central actors in this debate and we're not just young people having a say, but we're actually experts and we are also a big part of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for managing to covering both people in the mountains and youth. So this was extremely interesting. We are exactly on time now. Joachim, do you allow the opportunity for 2 questions or 3 questions? Okay, we got 3. Thank you very much. And there are at least 3 hands. So first, the one behind, yeah, in the right jacket, yeah.
Kirsten Dunlop from Climate Kick. Thank you very much for this discussion, and thank you for a film that I'm going to put alongside David Attenborough's Oceans and see if we can mobilize some thought. I have a question representing both a number of people that I am discussing with on a regular basis about what we might do, on your views on how the Academy of Pontifical Sciences, the Vatican, multi-faith convening, the institutes of human rights law might gather together to think about glaciers as civilization assets, as planetary commons, and begin to think about how do we put in place the frameworks of shared ownership, of self-ownership, of shared ownership and of stewardship, relating the risks of the lives of billions of people who depend on the water. So how do we step up into the action space of bringing legal frameworks, self-ownership, and the requirement of prudential governance of civilization stability across our entire financial and governance system, where these are the objects of preservation and stewardship?
Second question from, yeah, I think you have been discovered, yeah.
Thank you very much for a very interesting set of presentations. Sophie, I'm sorry, but I'm going to put you on the spot because I'd really like you to expand on what you started to get into. We heard a lot about the economic environment that exists in mountains, its dependence on tourism, and obviously that has profound impacts for young people. We heard about the cultural impact that these mountains have on the people that live in them. I'd really like you to expand, though, on how we see this more holistically, looking at the health impact and the various impacts that young people will face moving forwards as we see increasing instability in mountain regions and a growing dependence on shrinking economic opportunities for them.
So did I understand correctly about the aspect of health, which we did not cover indeed at all? Yeah, thank you. The third question, yeah. Can you raise your hand? Yeah.
Thank you. It's not much of a question, it's more of an observation. I lead a climate resilience advisory team with an insurance company. And I'd like to congratulate Harry on that superb video. The impact is not to be underestimated of such movies. We were approached by a major corporate, and they asked us to do a sea level rise analysis. And we thought it was very strange because sea level rise wasn't material to this type of industry. And they told us, and I asked, why are you looking at sea level rise? And they said, oh, the CEO saw a movie on National Geographic, and we know one location in our portfolio that could be impacted, and now they want to look at the entire portfolio. So these kind of movies really drive change. The second point, Herr Stocker, you said adaptation is taking place. Our experience is it's not. Yeah, we work with very large corporate companies all over the world. There's less and less investment being done on adaptation because they're looking at insurance. And insurance is the last line of defense. Insurance takes the residual risk after you've incorporated all the measures you need to put in place to reduce the impact. Insurance kicks in when it's too late, when you've already been impacted. So there needs to be a lot more done an adaptation of what we saw in Harry's movie. That's like putting a Band-Aid on an amputated limb. Yeah. The last point, Sophia, it's a systems-based approach that you need to look at risks. What we're seeing, also the previous panel, risks are not discrete. Yeah, we look at heat, we look at glacier melt independently, but it impacts a wider, the impacts are much wider. We know in Switzerland, we had the landslide in Blatten, in Lütjenthal. They're actually thinking of building the village again, even though it was completely destroyed, even though the flood risk could potentially increase in the future. The landslide blocked a small stream that's forming into a lake. Other effects, we were talking about beyond the Alps and the Balkans. I think everyone's forgotten, around 3 years ago, there was a major flooding in India and the Himalayas because of a glacier melt. It fell into a hydropower dam, the slide, and it washed away several villages, causing hundreds of lives of damage. So that systems approach really needs to be looked at. And I could tell you, corporates are not looking at that. When they designed that dam, they didn't consider the impact on downstream villages. Sorry for that long-winded...
Thank you very much. I would think, unfortunately, I need to stop the session here with these three questions. I'm very sorry for this. Maybe there are further ones. If I, maybe, unless there is an immediate answer you want to give to one of these questions.
I see you have one prepared.
No, I haven't one prepared. I would just go quite shortly with it in order not to eat too much into the recreation. I think the first question, basically, how to take these things actually and bring them further in the processes of the initiative from the Pontifical Academy of Science. I think it might be a very interesting part as a follow-up of this session, since after all we discussed European mountains here, and while some aspects of mountainous areas are the same worldwide, they are high and rough, but other parts of the world have still very different additional issues to talk about. So I would gratefully take this question as a way to go on here. Yeah.
If I may, a small addition along that request, how to go onward from here. I think the term of the commons needs to be reminded us that we are using the landscape, we are using the atmosphere, we are using the water. The question has to be asked, who owns the landscape? There was a little episode in your movie where this lady said, oh, well, if that company decides that they cannot live off the infrastructure they have, they will build another cable car. Well, my question is, on whose land? Who owns that land? Who owns the water? Who owns the atmosphere? And that's really the key question, the question of the commons. And that has to come back in our discussion. it costs something to use area or infrastructure of the commons.
Thank you, very important.
Perhaps picking up what you said, Thomas, and also trying to respond to a question about the shared ownership and the common goods, how to address them. I think there are, if you look at historical examples, there are usually three important steps that are involved. One is legitimate scientific evidence that frames the problem. Yeah, this could be IPCC, it could be something more regional, national reports. Second step, it needs to be clear enough what are the obligations, the responsibilities, and the targets that you can follow in that process. And this usually can help you with creating the legal boundary conditions for the actors to act. And there has been a very, very important development recently, which is the International Court of Justice has taken the IPCC evidence and has translated it into basically legal frameworks for individual countries and actors that we have to act upon. Yeah, so that's how societal change is happening. First the evidence, then the targets, then a clear legal framework to act on it. Yeah.
Thank you. Harry, you have the last word.
The last word on me. So what I wanted to say, probably a lot of you want to say, oh, where can I see this movie? You're happy to contact me. You find my homepage online, either with my name or the title of the film, and just write me an email and I send you a link. I'm happy to share you if it be discussed within a scientific area. And the last thing I want to mention is actually that would be Andrea Fischer moderating this panel. She is Austria's Scientist of the Year 2023. I live in Tyrol, in Western Austria, where tourism is top-notch of industry and politics. And the problem is Andrea Fischer is working strongly together with the tourism industry and also with the ski areas. She's also founded by them and gives statements like, glacier ski areas help to protect our glaciers. So these are the headlines in Austrian newspapers and magazines. I mean, she has right. It protects the snow, it protects the ice, that it doesn't melt faster. But everything that comes with it, like the whole use of the land, the whole impact that this industry on the mountain has, is not mentioned, and this is very difficult, so important to mention this from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia, do you have a very last short answer to the health question? Yeah.
Yes, it's a very, very fast answer that environmental issues are health issues and health issues are environmental issues. We cannot talk about health without talking about the environment. We've talked about heat, we've talked about buildings, we talked about trees, creating a sort of shade. It's easy to talk about the environment as just one thing, but it's highly interlinked with a lot of different things. As we've talked about, we've seen this morning. So what are the health aspects? Well, prevention, of course, is the key. It goes with mitigation and adaptation, but I'm not going to get too much into it because I'm also not a health expert. But environment equals health and health equals environment.
Thank you. So we have covered a rough 40% of the issues actually that would need to be important, but I would just like to thank the esteemed panel. It has been a pleasure, and also the active participation. And I think there is a lot of food for talk and for thought in the break, which I think is urgent to start now. Thank you.